Sometimes the best plans are born in the worst moments of your life. And what I found in that stranger's jacket pocket changed everything forever. But let me start from the beginning. The last few months something had been wrong. Michelle, my wife of 7 years, had become distant. Not that she had changed outwardly or started acting suspiciously, there was just some invisible wall that had appeared between us. Conversations became superficial, and evenings became silent. I'm Christopher, and I work as a manager at a large car dealership in Dallas. My job requires constant concentration, but lately I couldn't focus even on the simplest tasks. Something was gnawing at me from the inside, though I couldn't understand what exactly. That's when I made a decision I never would have made before. I installed video surveillance cameras throughout the house. I told Michelle it was for security after a series of burglaries in our neighborhood. She even supported the idea, which should have been my first red flag. For 3 weeks, nothing special happened. Regular household routine, regular weekdays. I started thinking I was just being paranoid due to work stress. But then came that Wednesday that divided my life into before and after. Sitting in the office, I decided to check the cameras just out of boredom. I opened the app on my phone and saw an unfamiliar man in our kitchen. Tall, athletic, wearing an expensive suit. He was standing too close to Michelle, and she was laughing in a way she hadn't laughed with me in a long time. My heart was pounding so loud I was afraid my colleagues would hear it. But what happened next exceeded all my worst fears. They kissed. Long, passionately, as if I didn't exist at all. I jumped out of the office without explaining anything to the secretary, got in my car and drove home. The gas pedal was pressed to the floor, thousands of thoughts spinning in my head about what I would say, what I would do. Adrenaline was boiling in my veins. But when I drove into our driveway at full speed, hearing the sound of my car, that man instantly understood what was happening. I managed to see him fly through the living room to the bedroom, and a few seconds later, how he flew out the back doors of our house in just his underwear. I ran into the house through the front doors just as he was escaping through the neighbors' yards. The picture would have been comical if it hadn't been so painful. A grown man in a business suit running barefoot in his underwear between houses, with neighborhood dogs chasing after him. But here's where it gets interesting. On the side where he was running, there was a high fence, and that neighbor had several dogs running around his property. I didn't know what exactly happened there, I only heard barking and his screams in the distance. It sounded like the dogs added some bites to his humiliation. For obvious reasons, I didn't pursue him through someone else's property where I knew several aggressive dogs were running around. I had a wife at home who could confess who this man was anyway. The barking continued for what felt like an eternity, mixed with increasingly desperate shouts. I could only imagine the scene, a half-naked man trying to climb a fence while being chased by angry dogs. Part of me felt satisfied that karma was working so quickly. Michelle was sitting on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a blanket, with a shocked expression on her face. But I was interested in something completely different. On the floor lay that same expensive suit, shirt, tie, and, most valuable of all, a wallet with documents. What I saw in those documents changed everything. But more about that later. Christopher, I can explain everything. Michelle began, but I raised my hand, stopping her. No need to explain. I saw everything. The next few hours passed in silence. Michelle cried. I sat in the living room with that man's documents and thought about a plan. His name was Michael Jenkins, and he turned out to be not just anyone. I should say that I've always been a man of principles. Violence isn't my way. But revenge can be very creative, especially when you have the right information. It turned out that Michael Jenkins was a successful financial consultant, married, with 2 children. His wife Sarah, according to information from social media, was a very religious woman, an active member of the local church. And also, in his wallet was a business card from an expensive hotel with a number on the back. Probably where they were meeting. I realized that the best revenge isn't physical violence, but destroying what's most precious to him. His reputation, his family, his impeccable image. The first thing I did was send an anonymous letter to his wife with details of their meetings at the hotel. But that was just the beginning. I found out which church she attended services at and sent a copy there too, addressed to the pastor. But the real genius of my plan lay in something else. His wallet contained credit card numbers and, most valuably, a piece of paper with PIN codes. It turns out some people are so overconfident that they write down passwords. I didn't steal his money. Instead, I did something much worse for a man like him. I donated all the funds from his accounts to charity. Homeless shelters, funds for helping sick children, animal protection organizations. All of this in his name, from his credit cards, with messages that Michael Jenkins asks not to publicize his noble deeds, but really wants to help. Of course, the banks quickly blocked the operations when he called. But the news had already spread. And when you suddenly become a secret philanthropist for several tens of thousands of dollars, everyone finds out about it. The most interesting part started a week later. His wife filed for divorce. The church community, learning the truth, turned away from him. And his firm, learning about the scandal with a client's mistress, yes, Michelle also turned out to be his client, fired him in connection with violation of corporate ethics. But the biggest surprise awaited me at home. When I returned after filing divorce papers, Michelle met me with suitcases. "You destroyed his life," she said quietly. "And he destroyed ours," I replied. "You don't understand. We were going to..." "What? Get married?" I interrupted her. "After you divorced me with his money?" She fell silent. In her eyes I saw not repentance but anger. Anger that her plans were ruined. "He lost everything because of you. His job, family, reputation. And I lost faith in love. I think we're even." Michelle took her things that same evening. I found out later that Michael also left town, moved to some other state, trying to start life anew. But my story doesn't end there. What happened next showed me just how deep this betrayal went and how far people will go when their comfortable lies are exposed. A month after Michelle left, I was still living in our house, trying to decide what to do next. The silence was deafening after 7 years of shared life. Every corner reminded me of better times, of the woman I thought I knew. Then I received a call that changed everything again. "Is this Christopher Martinez?" The voice was unfamiliar, female, shaky. "Yes, who's asking?" "This is Sarah Jenkins, Michael's ex-wife." My heart stopped. Why was she calling me? "I think we need to talk," she continued. "There are things you need to know about your wife and my husband. Things that go back much further than you might think." We met at a coffee shop downtown the next day. Sarah was a petite woman in her 40s, with tired eyes that spoke of recent tears. She carried a manila folder that she placed on the table between us. "How long did you think they were seeing each other?" she asked without preamble. "A few months, maybe?" I replied, though even as I said it, I realized I had no real idea. Sarah opened the folder and pulled out printed emails, text messages, bank statements. "Try 3 years." The world seemed to tilt. 3 years. That meant their affair started just 4 years into our marriage, during what I thought were some of our happiest times. "I hired a private investigator after your intervention," Sarah continued, her voice bitter. "Michael thought he was so careful, but he left digital footprints everywhere. Hotel receipts, restaurant charges, even a joint savings account they opened together." She slid a bank statement across the table. There it was in black and white, a savings account in both their names with over $80,000. Money they had been siphoning away, preparing for their new life together. "They were planning to leave us both," Sarah said, watching my face. "Michael was going to ask for a divorce after he got a promotion at work. They had it all figured out. Michelle was going to claim you were abusive to get more in the settlement." The coffee in my mouth turned bitter. Abusive. She had been documenting things. Fake injuries, emotional distress claims. My investigator found emails where she detailed her strategy with Michael. "They were going to take you for everything you had." I sat back in my chair, stunned. The woman I had loved, who I thought had simply made a mistake, had been systematically planning to destroy my life for 3 years. "There's more," Sarah continued, pulling out more papers. "The house you live in? She had been trying to get you to add her name to the deed for 2 years. Every romantic dinner, every sweet gesture, it was all part of the plan." I remembered those conversations. Michelle had brought up adding her to the deed several times, always in moments when I was happy, relaxed. I had always said we'd talk about it later, that there was no rush since we were married. Now I understood why she had seemed frustrated each time I deflected. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because we're both victims here. And because I want them to pay for what they did to our families." Sarah's plan was simple but devastating. She wanted to expose not just the affair but the financial fraud, the planned false accusations, everything. She had evidence of wire fraud, since they had been moving money across state lines. The false abuse allegations could be considered a conspiracy to commit perjury. "I've already been to the police," she said. "But I wanted to give you the choice of whether to press charges too." That evening I sat in my house, thankfully still only in my name, and read through all the evidence Sarah had given me. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. Michelle hadn't just cheated, she had been systematically planning to destroy my life and steal everything I had worked for. The text messages were the worst part. Reading Michelle's words to Michael about how pathetic I was, how easy it was to manipulate me, how she couldn't wait to be free of our boring life together. She had even joked about my habits, my attempts to be romantic, the gifts I had given her. One message stood out: Chris actually thinks I love him. It's almost sad how trusting he is. This is going to be easier than we thought. I called Sarah that night. I'm pressing charges. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Michelle was arrested for wire fraud and conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming: bank records, emails, text messages. Michael faced similar charges, plus additional counts for his role as a financial advisor engaging in fraudulent activities with a client. The local news picked up the story. Financial advisor and client lover charged in elaborate marriage fraud scheme. Michelle's photo was on the front page of the local paper. The story detailed how they had planned to frame their respective spouses and steal hundreds of thousands of dollars in divorce settlements. During the trial, more details came out. Michelle took the stand in her own defense, and I saw a side of her I had never seen before. Cold, calculating, unrepentant. When asked by her lawyer if she felt any remorse for deceiving me, she replied, "I feel remorse for getting caught." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Both Michelle and Michael were found guilty on all counts. Michelle was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution. Michael got 6 years due to his position of trust as a financial advisor. But the story still wasn't over. 2 weeks after the sentencing, I received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a USB drive and a note: "You deserve to know the whole truth." The USB contained security footage from the hotel where they had been meeting. But not just recent footage going back 3 years. Hundreds of hours of them entering and leaving rooms, kissing in hallways, planning their future together while destroying ours. In one video, dated just 2 months after our 5th wedding anniversary, I watched Michelle and Michael toasting with champagne. The audio was clear enough to hear Michael say, "To Sarah's stupidity and Christopher's blind trust. They're making this so easy for us." Michelle's response chilled me to the bone: "Christopher's pathetic. He actually thinks I'm the woman of his dreams. If he only knew that every time he touches me, I'm thinking about you." I don't know who sent me that footage, but I suspect it was someone from the hotel staff who had figured out what was happening and felt sorry for the betrayed spouses. The divorce was finalized while Michelle was in prison. Since she was incarcerated for fraud, I was able to get an uncontested divorce. She got nothing, not surprising, given that she was a convicted felon who had tried to defraud me. I sold the house and moved to Austin for a fresh start. The car dealership helped me transfer to their location there. Sarah and I stayed in touch, not romantically, but as friends who had survived the same nightmare. She moved back to her hometown in Ohio with her children. On the day Michelle was scheduled to be released from prison, I received one final call from her. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Christopher?" Her voice was different, smaller, defeated. "What do you want, Michelle?" I wanted to apologize. I know it doesn't mean anything now, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry." "Are you sorry you did it or sorry you got caught?" There was a long pause. "Both, I guess." "I know that's not what you want to hear." "You're right. It's not." "I lost everything," she continued. "My family won't speak to me. I can't get a job with a felony record. I'm living in a halfway house. You made your choices, Michelle. All of them. I know. I sometimes think about what we could have had if I hadn't." "Don't," I cut her off. "Don't you dare try to rewrite history now. You spent 3 years planning to destroy my life. You called me pathetic to your lover. You were going to falsely accuse me of abuse. Don't pretend this was some momentary lapse in judgment." She was crying now. I know all of that. Just what?" "I just wanted you to know that somewhere, buried deep down, there was a part of me that did love you. I know it doesn't matter now, but it was there." "If that's true," I said, "then that makes what you did even worse. Because it means you knew exactly what you were destroying and you did it anyway." I hung up and blocked her number. 6 months later, I met Jennifer. She was a divorced mother of one, a teacher who had also been betrayed by someone she trusted. We met at a coffee shop when she accidentally grabbed my order instead of hers. We started talking, and 3 hours later we were still there, sharing stories and laughing. Our relationship grew slowly. Both of us had been burned badly, so we took our time. No rushing, no grand gestures, just 2 people learning to trust again. Her daughter Emma, a bright 12-year-old, was initially skeptical of any man in her mother's life, but gradually warmed up to me. A year after Michelle's call, Jennifer and I moved in together. Not because we were rushing toward marriage, but because we had found something neither of us had expected after our respective betrayals: peace. The kind of relationship where you can be completely yourself without fear, without wondering if the person next to you is planning your downfall. I still think about that Wednesday when everything changed. The sound of my tires on the driveway, the sight of a man running through my neighbor's yard in his underwear, the barking of dogs in the distance. It was the day that ended one life and began another. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had never installed those cameras, if I had remained oblivious to Michelle's plans. Would she have gone through with the false allegations? Would I be bankrupt, possibly in jail, while she and Michael lived happily on the money they had stolen? I think the answer is yes. And that knowledge, more than anything else, tells me I made the right choices. Michelle served 3.5 years of her sentence. I heard from Sarah that she was released early for good behavior. She works at a gas station now, lives alone in a studio apartment. Michael served his full 6 years and moved to another state when he got out. Sarah remarried last year, a good man who loves her children as his own. As for me, I learned that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing. Jennifer and I are talking about marriage, about combining our lives officially. Emma has started calling me almost dad, which makes me smile every time. The house I bought in Austin has a security system, but no cameras inside. I don't need them anymore. I'm not watching for betrayal because I'm with someone who doesn't have it in her to betray anyone. Sometimes trust, once broken, can be rebuilt. But it has to be with the right person, in the right circumstances, with complete honesty from both sides. Jennifer knows my whole story just as I know hers. We've both seen what deception can do, and neither of us ever wants to go through it again. On our first anniversary of living together, Jennifer gave me a photo album. It was filled with pictures of us, of Emma, of the life we were building together. On the last page she had written, "To new beginnings and old lessons learned." That night, as I watched Jennifer reading to Emma before bed, I realized something important. Michelle hadn't just taken 3 years of my life with her lies. She had also, inadvertently, led me to exactly where I was supposed to be. I never would have met Jennifer if I had stayed married to Michelle. Emma would never have had a positive male figure in her life. Sarah would never have been free to find real love again. Even Michael, serving time in prison, had a chance to become a better person, though I honestly don't care if he takes it or not. The revenge I had planned for Michael, the financial donations, the destroyed reputation, had seemed so important at the time. But in the end, the best revenge was simply living well, loving honestly, and building something real with someone who deserved it. 2 years ago, if someone had told me that my wife's betrayal would lead to the happiest period of my life, I would have thought they were insane. But here I am, in a relationship built on truth instead of lies, with a woman who sees me as her partner instead of her mark, helping raise a child who looks at me with respect instead of calculation. Michelle's betrayal taught me the difference between love and manipulation, between a partnership and a con game. For that lesson, as painful as it was to learn, I'm almost grateful. The man who ran through my neighbor's yard that day, chased by dogs and leaving his dignity in tatters, thought he was running toward a better life. Instead, he was running toward prison. Meanwhile, the man he was betraying was about to discover what real love actually looks like. Jennifer often asks me if I regret the way I handled things, if I wish I had been less vindictive toward Michelle and Michael. My answer is always the same. I regret that they forced me to make those choices, but I don't regret the choices themselves. They were planning to destroy innocent people for money. They deserved consequences. Some might say 4 years in prison was too harsh for adultery and financial planning. But it wasn't adultery and financial planning, it was wire fraud, conspiracy to commit perjury, and an elaborate scheme to destroy 2 families for personal gain. The legal system saw it correctly. Today marks exactly 3 years since that Wednesday. Emma is 15 now, looking at colleges. Jennifer and I are officially engaged, planning a small ceremony next spring. Sarah sent a Christmas card with pictures of her new family. She looks genuinely happy for the first time in the photos I've seen of her. I don't know what Michelle is doing and I don't care. I don't know if Michael ever rebuilt his life and I don't care about that either. They became irrelevant to my story the moment the judge's gavel fell. The only thing I carried forward from that experience was the knowledge that betrayal reveals character. Not just in the betrayer, but in the betrayed. How you handle being destroyed says everything about who you are and who you're capable of becoming. I chose to fight back intelligently, legally, and completely. I chose to rebuild rather than wallow. I chose to trust again, carefully but completely. Most importantly, I chose to see my destruction as renovation rather than demolition. That Wednesday afternoon, watching a half-naked man run through my neighbor's yard while dogs barked in pursuit, I thought my life was ending. I had no idea it was actually just beginning. But there's one more chapter to this story that I've never told anyone, not even Jennifer. It happened 6 months ago, and it proved that sometimes the universe has its own sense of justice. I was at a business conference in Denver, representing our Austin dealership at a luxury car expo. The event was held at one of those massive convention centers, filled with gleaming vehicles and well-dressed salespeople. I was manning our booth, discussing financing options with a potential client, when I heard a familiar voice from the next aisle over. "Sir, I can offer you the best rates in the city." My experience in financial consulting spans over 15 years. My blood ran cold. It was Michael's voice, though it sounded different, more desperate, less confident than the arrogant tone I remembered from that day I'd watched him through the cameras. I excused myself from my client and walked around the corner. There he was, standing behind a small booth for some cut-rate loan company I'd never heard of. He looked older, thinner, wearing a suit that had seen better days. Gone was the expensive tailored look he'd had when he was running around my house in his underwear. He was talking to an elderly couple, trying to convince them to refinance their home. Something about his pitch felt off, too aggressive, too promising. The red flags were everywhere if you knew what to look for. For a moment I considered walking away. The man had already lost everything, his career, his family, his reputation. He'd served his time in prison. Wasn't that enough? But then I heard him say to the elderly couple, "Trust me, I've never steered a client wrong. My track record speaks for itself." The lie was so blatant, so audacious that I couldn't let it slide. Here he was, a convicted felon who had defrauded clients, lying to vulnerable elderly people about his trustworthiness. I approached the couple. "Excuse me, folks. I couldn't help overhearing. Before you sign anything, you might want to know that this man is a convicted felon who served 6 years in federal prison for financial fraud." The elderly man's eyes widened. "Is that true?" Michael's face went pale. He recognized me now and I could see the panic in his eyes. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I said calmly, pulling out my phone. "I can show you the court records right here. His name is Michael Jenkins and he was convicted of wire fraud and conspiracy. He targeted married couples just like yourselves." The elderly couple quickly gathered their papers and left. Michael stood there, his hands shaking slightly. "You couldn't just let it go, could you?" he said quietly. "You couldn't just be honest, could you?" I replied. "Even now, even after everything, you're still trying to con people." He looked around the convention center nervously. "I need this job. I've got nothing left." "Then get a job that doesn't involve lying to people. Stock shelves, flip burgers, clean offices. There are honest ways to make a living." "You don't understand what it's like," he said, his voice rising slightly. "No one will hire me with my record. This was the only company that would take a chance. And now I understand why," I said. "They hire people with no ethics because their business model requires it." I walked back to my booth, but I kept an eye on Michael throughout the day. I watched him strike out with client after client, his desperation becoming more obvious with each rejection. By the end of the day, I saw him packing up his materials with slumped shoulders. That evening, back at my hotel, I did some research on the company Michael was working for. What I found didn't surprise me. They were under investigation by 3 state attorney generals for predatory lending practices. Their business model was specifically designed to target elderly and financially vulnerable people. I spent the next hour documenting everything: screenshots of their website, records of the investigation, photos of Michael at the convention. Then I sent a comprehensive report to the Colorado Attorney General's office, the Better Business Bureau, and the convention center's management. 3 weeks later, I read in the news that the loan company had been shut down and several employees, including a former financial advisor with prior fraud convictions, had been arrested for operating an unlicensed lending business. I never found out exactly what happened to Michael after that, but I heard through Sarah that he'd moved back to his hometown and was working at his brother's landscaping business. Honest work, finally. The incident made me realize something important about closure. I thought I had moved on completely, that Michelle and Michael were just distant memories that no longer affected me. But seeing him trying to con vulnerable people again brought back all the anger I thought I'd processed. Jennifer noticed the change in me when I got back from Denver. I was quieter, more withdrawn. Finally, she sat me down and asked what was bothering me. I told her the whole story, about seeing Michael, about getting him arrested again, about the anger that had flared up so unexpectedly. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "No," I said without hesitation. He was targeting elderly people, using the same manipulation tactics he used on Michelle to destroy our marriage. But I'm bothered that it still affects me this much. Jennifer took my hand. Christopher, healing isn't linear. You don't just get over something like that and never feel angry about it again. What matters is how you channel that anger. She was right as usual. I had channeled it into protecting innocent people rather than just seeking personal revenge. Besides, she added with a slight smile, the universe seems to keep putting him in your path when he's doing something wrong. Maybe you're supposed to be his conscience since he clearly doesn't have one of his own. That conversation helped me understand something crucial about my journey. The betrayal had changed me fundamentally, not just in how I approached relationships, but in how I saw justice and responsibility. I couldn't turn a blind eye to people being victimized, especially when I had the power to stop it. A few months later, Emma asked me about the whole situation. She was now old enough to understand the complexities of adult relationships and had heard Jennifer and me discussing some of the aftermath. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd never found out?" she asked during one of our weekend fishing trips. It was a thoughtful question from a remarkably mature teenager. "Every day," I admitted. "But not in the way you might think. I don't wonder if I would have been happier not knowing. I wonder how much worse it could have gotten." "What do you mean?" "Your mom and I have talked about this. People who are capable of that level of deception don't usually stop on their own. Michelle and Michael would have kept escalating. The lies would have gotten bigger, the stakes higher. Eventually it would have all come crashing down anyway, but by then more people would have been hurt." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "So finding out when you did was actually lucky?" "In a way, yes. It was devastating at the time, but it prevented something even worse from happening. That fishing trip was one of many moments that made me realize how much my perspective had shifted. The teenage girl asking me profound questions about life and relationships wasn't even my biological daughter, but she felt like family in a way that was deeper and more authentic than the biological family I'd thought I had with Michelle. Jennifer and I got married the following spring in a small ceremony in her parents' backyard. Emma walked her down the aisle, and Sarah came all the way from Ohio to attend. It was a celebration of new beginnings rather than just a wedding. During my vows, I spoke about how betrayal had taught me the difference between performance and authenticity, between someone who loves you and someone who loves what you can provide. I promised Jennifer not just fidelity, but complete transparency, the kind of relationship where hiding things would be impossible even if we wanted to. At the reception, Sarah pulled me aside. "I have something to tell you," she said, looking both nervous and excited. "What is it?" "Michael's brother called me last week. Michael had a heart attack while working in their landscaping business. He's okay, but he's in the hospital, and apparently he's been asking to speak with both of us." My first instinct was to say no immediately. Why would I want to hear anything Michael had to say? "I told his brother I'd think about it," Sarah continued. "But I wanted to ask you first. If we both said no, he'd probably drop it." "What do you think he wants?" "According to his brother, he wants to apologize. Really apologize, not just the superficial sorry I got caught type." I thought about it for several days. Jennifer's advice was simple. Follow your instincts, but don't make the decision from a place of anger. Eventually, Sarah and I decided to go together. We met at the hospital in Michael's hometown, a small city in Nebraska where his brother's landscaping business was located. Michael looked terrible. The heart attack had been severe and he'd lost significant weight. He was pale, connected to various monitors, looking every day of his age and then some. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly when we entered the room. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither were we," Sarah replied. He was quiet for a long moment, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I know this sounds hollow, but I wanted to tell you both how sorry I am. Not sorry I got caught, not sorry about the consequences, but sorry for what I did to your families." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation, the calculated expressions I remembered from the trial. But he just looked tired and defeated. "The doctor says I might have another heart attack within the next few years," he continued. Something about the damage already done. I realized I might not get another chance to say this. "Say what exactly?" I asked. "That you were both good people who deserved better. That what Michelle and I did wasn't about you not being enough, it was about us being broken inside. That the life I thought I wanted with her was built on a foundation of lies, and it never would have worked anyway." He paused, breathing heavily. "And Christopher, I wanted to tell you that seeing you at that convention center, the way you protected those elderly people, it made me realize something. You're still the same decent person you always were. What we did to you didn't change your fundamental character. But what we did changed us into people we couldn't live with." Sarah spoke up. Are you asking for forgiveness? I'm not asking for anything, Michael replied. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what we destroyed and I'm sorry. We stayed for about 20 minutes. The conversation wasn't dramatic or cathartic, it was just sad. Here was a man who had thrown away everything good in his life for a fantasy that was built on hurting other people. As we left the hospital, Sarah asked me how I felt. Empty, I said. Not angry, not satisfied, not vindicated. Just empty. Is that good or bad? I think it's exactly what closure is supposed to feel like. Michael died 4 months later from a second heart attack. His brother called Sarah to let her know, and she called me. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sadness, just a sense that a chapter had finally ended. At his funeral, which neither Sarah nor I attended, Michelle apparently showed up. According to mutual acquaintances who were there, she looked rough. The hard life of a convicted felon had aged her prematurely. She didn't speak at the service, just sat in the back and left immediately after. I heard later that she tried to contact his brother, claiming she had been the love of Michael's life and deserved some of his personal effects. The brother, who knew the whole story, refused and told her never to contact the family again. That detail, more than anything else, showed me that Michelle hadn't changed at all. Even at Michael's funeral, she was still trying to manipulate and take what wasn't hers. 2 years have passed since then. Emma is now in college, studying social work because she wants to help people who have been victimized by others. She says my story inspired her to choose that path, which both humbles and amazes me. Jennifer and I are talking about having a child together, which would have terrified me a few years ago but now feels like the natural next step in building our authentic life together. Sometimes I drive past the house where Michelle and I lived, though it's been renovated and looks completely different now. The new owners added a beautiful garden where Michelle used to complain about the landscaping. It strikes me as poetic somehow, something beautiful growing where there used to be nothing but complaints. The neighborhood dogs that chased Michael through that yard are probably too old to chase anyone now, but I smile every time I think about that scene. It was the moment when their carefully constructed fantasy collided with reality, and reality won. Looking back, I realized that the most important thing I learned wasn't about recognizing deception or protecting myself from betrayal. It was about the difference between revenge and justice, between punishment and consequences, between destroying someone and allowing them to face the natural results of their choices. I didn't destroy Michelle and Michael's lives, they did that themselves. I just made sure they couldn't destroy anyone else's in the process. And in the end, that distinction made all the difference in who I became after the betrayal. I became someone who protects rather than punishes, someone who builds rather than destroys, someone who chooses love based on authenticity rather than performance. The scared, angry man who installed those security cameras still exists inside me somewhere. But he's been joined by a wiser, calmer man who knows the difference between being careful and being paranoid, between protecting yourself and closing yourself off from love. Jennifer sometimes asks me if I'm glad Michelle cheated, since it led us to each other. It's a complicated question with a complicated answer. I'm not glad about the pain it caused not just to me but to Sarah, to Michael's children, to everyone whose lives were disrupted by their selfish choices. But I am grateful for the man those experiences turned me into, and I'm grateful that path led me to the family I have now. That Wednesday afternoon when a half-naked man ran through my neighbor's yard while dogs barked in pursuit, I thought I was watching the end of everything I valued. Instead, I was watching the beginning of everything I never knew I needed. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Maybe YouTube will no longer offer you my channel, so subscribe to it by clicking subscribe on the right under the video to receive new interesting stories. Also on the right of the video there is a playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to, and you can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.